we talk about the health and history of the Merrimack River. My guest today is Dr. Lang Glenn, president of Northern Essex Community College in Haverhill and Lawrence. Welcome, Dr. Glenn.
Thank you, Dyke. It's good to be here.
Last summer, you were a key organizer of a kayak trip down the Merrimack River, and that's about 117 miles because you folks started way up in New Hampshire. What was your motivation, and how did you get momentum for this? Because a lot of people said, gee, I didn't know people went all the way down the river. How did this start?
I'm an outdoors guy. I like exercise. I like being outside. I'm climbing the 48 4,000 footers in New Hampshire. I cross-country ski, everything you can imagine to do outside. One of the reasons I love this part of the world. And I have a brother who shares that interest with me, and he and I were originally going to tackle this river expedition. For a variety of reasons, he couldn't do it, so I turned to a couple of friends. One of them is the president of the Haverhill Chamber of Commerce, Dugan Sherwood, and the other is the executive director for an organization called the Lawrence Partnership in Lawrence. And I said, guys, here's an opportunity, right? Highlight the river, highlight the ecological needs, the economic development needs, partnerships, all that kind of stuff. And it grew from there.
Well, some people well known to our area, and it is election day, so I'll mention him. State Rep Jim Kelcourse from Amesbury, State Senator Diana DiZoglio from Methuen were involved. I think Mayor Donna Holliday took an oar up, a paddle up, and City Councilor Charlie Tantar. How did you get the word out? And as I understand it, some people went the whole way, including Jim Kelcourse. Some people may have gone for one day, but how did you get the word out?
Sure. It sort of grew organically. We weren't looking to have a huge flotilla necessarily. And as you pointed out, for a lot of reasons, some elected officials were interested. There's some legislation pending about the river. So we picked up, besides the people you mentioned, Representative Christina Minicucci was involved. We had a state senator from Lowell, Edward Kennedy, who was there for part of it. And we had a group of 10 of us who did the full 4 days, and then a number of others. Mayor Holliday, for example, State Rep Andy Vargas, State Rep Linda Dean Campbell, who did a day or 2 days in some cases. And, however far somebody chose to paddle with us, our goal was to finish strong together, right? And there was a lot of pitching in and helping each other out along the way, that's for sure.
Now, in 2016, the Merrimack was adjudged to be one of the dirtiest rivers in the country. Could that be true? When you were coming down the river, did you see signs of pollution or signs that there have been CSOs, and those are combined sewage overflows for some of our listeners? But, they're a significant concern after major rains.
Sure. I will say I learned a lot myself on this trip. I'm not an expert in the area that we're talking about right now. Let me be clear about that. I'm a recreational boater and an outdoors guy, and I notice things certainly, but I'm not an expert in this area. What I can say is from a historical perspective, the river is cleaner than it used to be, and it has a ways to go, right? So yes, during our 4 days on the river, we got stormed off the river twice.
What does that mean? It was lightning, or the fact that...
Lightning is what it really is, right? You're already in the river, you can get a little wet, but when lightning starts bouncing around, you need to get off, right? So the first night, at the end of the day, right, both times it was toward the end of the day, so we didn't really lose mileage, but it became unsafe to stay on the river. So as we were wrapping up our first day, huge storm, buckets of rain. I think it rained 3 inches up near Concord that night. Really? Torrential rain. So instead of our originally planned campsite at the White Sands Conservation Area, we ended up at a nearby llama farm. So there's a story there. And predictably, the next day, we had CSOs, right? Because so much rain fell, the sewage couldn't, the containers couldn't hold it all, and they had to discharge, right? So yes, the next morning, you can see some evidence, of CSOs and actively, right, discharging into the river. We weren't out there water sampling and seeing, how much per ounce and that sort of thing. But yes, we had CSOs that day. And then the second night, we had another storm and got stormed off the river. So the third day, same kind of a thing. So we know that while we were out there in the river, there were active CSOs occurring, and we still had people on our trip who were swimming in the river, jumping off of rope swings into the river. Nobody died or got sick, right? I don't mean to minimize the importance of those things, but to put them into perspective, right?
I should mention that there is a commission of local, state, and federal officials who have recently organized to look into how CSOs can be combated, at the least, to have a warning system when a major discharge has occurred upriver. Of course, in Newburyport, we're very conscious of that.
Yeah.
We're at the end of the line here. But Senator DiZoglio, I believe, is a leader in getting a regional commission going so that work can be done on an organized basis.
Right, and I think one of the keys there, of course, you mentioned Newburyport being at the end of that river. The river starts, of course, up in New Hampshire, and this commission is important in Massachusetts and is going to have to find some way to straddle state lines and work with our colleagues and partners up the river. As we paddled downriver ourselves, we had some planned stops in New Hampshire communities, in Concord, and Nashua, and Manchester, press conferences. The Merrimack River Valley Watershed Council was quite helpful in arranging some of those details. And we heard from the man who's the director for the statewide New Hampshire Fish and Game and Water Control Commission, what their awareness was of these issues, and they're certainly aware of them, right? In a city like Manchester, it's millions and millions of dollars to address this over a period of time, and they're working to do that. Of course, everyone downriver would prefer it happen faster. Similarly, a community like Haverhill, how do they invest what they need to invest to get this taken care of sooner rather than later? There are a lot of, I think, well-intentioned people who are quite aware of these issues now working to address them.
You alluded to staying overnight in a few places. Where did you stay over? And it may have changed, but are there state parks along the way, or were there? You said a llama farm. I didn't know there was a llama farm there, but it sounds like any llama farm in a storm.
Yeah, exactly right. So we had, well, two things. There are not a lot of sort of state park camping. In fact, there are no, as far as I'm aware, state park camping opportunities along that river, along 117 miles of it, until you get down to Salisbury, the reservation there, and of course those camp spots are reserved out the day they go out for the public, right? So the river hasn't been developed that way, right? There are farms along the river, there are residences along the river, there's commerce along the river. There's not campsites along the river. What we ended up doing was getting special permission the first night from the White Sands Conservation Area just south of Concord. Not normally a campsite, by the way. I'm not encouraging listeners to go out and do that. Beautiful little patch of land that we didn't get to camp on because of the storm. The next night in Nashua, a private boating club, the Independence Rowing Club in Nashua, New Hampshire, gave us permission to use their boathouse. So some people stayed in tents, some people went into the boathouse. And then the third night, it was the Lawrence Boathouse, City of Lawrence, also a private boating club, allowed us to use their facilities, and everybody pitched tents outside. So
this does sound like a real adventure.
It was a real adventure, absolutely, yes.
Well, it must have been interesting as well because I've seen a lot of aerial photos of the river, and some areas are urban and historical, like Lawrence and Lowell certainly have many mills from the old days. 1822, I think, is when Lowell got started in a big way. And then there are other areas that, they're farmland, they're forests. Is this something that you found, that there's a diversity of elements on the
Absolutely.
riverside?
We live in a remarkable spot on this planet. We just do. And there's great beauty along that river. So anyone who has the mistaken impression that this river is, polluted and unusable, please banish that from your thoughts. There is all kinds of recreational opportunity and scenic beauty up there, and some of that scenic beauty, as you said, is in the mill towns, in Manchester, in Lowell, in Lawrence, in Haverhill, and paddling along the river and seeing, the man-made canyons is fascinating.
Well, I ate lunch in Lawrence recently, right on the water, and in one of the old mill buildings, and it was beautiful.
Good.
And as you say, it was kind of a canyon because across the river was a very large structure, but it was intriguing and historical in that way.
So, downtown Haverhill is reinventing its riverfront right now. For a lot of years, when that river was truly polluted, the idea was to put up walls so no one even had to look at it, right? Those walls are coming down. You've got Harbor Place there in downtown Haverhill now. The Heights, Sal Napoli is building a 10-story building there. Lots of redevelopment occurring along the river, and, we're looking to get more recreation out onto that river so that, more docks to be able to be used. Downtown Lawrence and along the river in Lawrence, which has quite a long stretch of the river running through it. Similarly, again, Sal Napoli's place there at the Riverwalk, new buildings going up, riverfront, all that sort of thing, and lots of space.
And what ambitious plan.
Oh, absolutely. Wonderful.
So I'm talking with Dr. Lane Glenn, who is president of Northern Essex Community College. I'm Dyke Hendrickson, a journalist in the area. I'm also the outreach historian for the Custom House Maritime Museum. So sometimes I talk about history. This year we've talked a lot about the health of the river. But we were talking about the beauty of the North Shore and the beauty of the river itself. But you're from Oklahoma, Lane. Can you talk a little about how you got here? And it wasn't just one trip either. I think you hit Michigan, you hit numerous spots, and maybe you can talk a little about how you got to the North Shore.
Yeah, I'll say I spent some time in Oklahoma. So originally, I was born in Worcester. I started out with a foster family. I was adopted. I grew up in a military family. My adoptive father was a Marine. We traveled around a lot. So Ohio, Oklahoma, Virginia, California, lots of places. And when he retired, we ended up back in Oklahoma. So I was middle school, high school there, different part of the world certainly, but had also been out on the West Coast. Went up to Michigan for a doctorate at Michigan State University and began vacationing out on Cape Cod. And I have some relatives out here, reconnected actually with my biological family who's in the area. So got to know them, brothers and sisters I never knew I had, and parents and other. Yeah, it's been a wonderful journey. Yeah, that's been a significant awakening. That's been a part of it. And as an outdoors guy, again. What abundant beauty and opportunity out here. The ocean, the mountains, Boston for the cityscape, the rivers, the lakes, just a magnificent place to be.
It is, and you're the head of the college, but the college is putting an investment into Haverhill and Lawrence as well. Right. Can you talk a little about the classes and also the facilities that you're trying to create in both of those communities?
Sure. So Northern Essex Community College, began in Haverhill almost 60 years ago, and we've got 106 acres on Lake Canosa there, suburban setting. It's absolutely beautiful. It looks like a residential campus, and we're about to launch a new hospitality and culinary arts institute downtown along that river, where all that redevelopment is occurring in Salapoli's new building, The Heights. So we'll have a couple floors there with helping the restaurant and hotel industries.
Well, that would be very useful, I would think.
You bet.
Every community, you go there and they seem to need workers and skilled workers especially.
Yeah. Huge demand for that. And over in Lawrence, we've spent the last several years really growing. We're up near 3,000 students in Lawrence, half a dozen buildings. Just a few days ago, we unveiled a new renovation of our largest classroom building, the Dimitri building, named for the college's second president, John Dimitri. So we spent a few $1 million renovating that building. A few years back, we opened the El Hefney Health and Technology Center, $27 million facility with state-of-the-art hospital equipment, mannequins simulating patient care, all these things. So really, we've got some remarkable opportunities for higher education. We partner with both public and private colleges in the Merrimack Valley to extend those opportunities to people who want to get their degrees. We try to, in as many ways as possible, connect the students and the adults in the Merrimack Valley to the educational opportunities they need.
Well, it is Election Day, as we've already noticed, and one of the elements, at least in the presidential landscape, is the thought of free college for students. And, they're back and forth on this, but you're in that space where people talk about, well, why couldn't there be community college for free? Does that come up in your environment, and is this something that's doable?
The answer to your first question is yes. The answer to your second question is I don't think so, right? So does it come up in my environment? Yes, it comes up a lot. Is it doable? Listen, I'm an optimist, Dyke, and I'd like to say that it would be. But I have to be a realist as well. If you look at the last 30 years of higher education funding in America, it's only gone one direction, and that is down.
I've learned that recently, and I was surprised. Yeah. But please continue.
Yeah. So we have fewer resources on a per student basis from the state today than we did in 2001, right? So we try not to pass those costs along to students, especially at the community college level where our students are very price sensitive. I think it would be impossible, really impossible, for the state of Massachusetts to go from really disinvesting. I will say, this administration and our current legislature has done more to hold the line, right? Not put significant new money in, but to hold the line anyway, which is better than losses. And after 30 years of, really barely holding the line, I can't see the state coming up with hundreds of millions of dollars to make it free. Let me say this, too. From a community college perspective, free tuition is less important to our students than other things. Now, that might be surprising for you to hear. The average cost of attendance at Northern Essex Community College, tuition and fees, is around $6,000 a year. Mm-hmm. A Pell Grant for students who receive them, which is more than half of our students, is $6,000 a year, right? The tuition and fees for a lot of community college students are covered through grant resources. Where they run into challenges is the cost of books, transportation, rent, food, childcare, the lost opportunity cost. Sometimes they're low enough income that they need to work a lot, and going to class means they're not working. So there are a lot of other economic things that are challenges to our students than tuition. So I'm less compelled by the tuition arguments and more interested in trying to help our students in all those other areas.
But you've done so much in Lawrence and Haverhill, and you alluded to partners. Who are your partners in this sense? You said private and public, but maybe you could just talk about a couple of organizations that may have been helpful.
Sure. So we partner with, state, local officials, of course, and then on top of that, nonprofits, social service agencies, foundations, businesses. In Lawrence, the college was one of several founders of something called the Lawrence Partnership, which is an economic development group designed to really drive economic development in the city. So the banks, Eastern Bank, TD Bank, Enterprise Bank, a number of banks in the city worked with us to create a venture loan fund for small businesses. The mill owners, the property owners, the hospital, other educational providers, manufacturers, Gemline, for example, in the city. Dozens of these organizations came together to work with the college in this economic development effort, which has made a difference, we think, right?
Plus, the price must be right in some areas. As you know, the commercial real estate costs are quite significant in many areas, and perhaps Lawrence and even Haverhill.
And Haverhill as well, right.
Would be able to offer a better deal or better price per square foot.
You bet. Currently, I have the privilege of chairing the board for the Haverhill Chamber of Commerce. I work in several communities where the college has interests, and I will say that's an increasingly attractive prospect. If you're a startup in Boston or Cambridge, you can't afford, a closet, right. And a short train ride away is Haverhill or is Lawrence, and each of these communities offer, better rates, certainly square footage, but also a talented workforce. Right, that's one of the things that we're there to provide. So we want to make sure everyone knows about that, and that workforce is as prepared as it can possibly be.
We were talking about the environment of the Merrimack River. Are there courses or programs that focus on the environment in your school area, or perhaps they're internships? I know I'm learning, internships are very helpful for young people. Northeastern University, of course, made its bones years ago by having a strong internship program. Are you able to, bring some of these opportunities to the students?
You bet. So we offer associate's degrees in chemistry and physics and environmental science for students who might be interested in what we're talking about in a couple of different ways. So we've got associate degrees in science that typically transfer to four-year degrees. We actually created, this has been 7 or 8 years ago now, the first new applied science degree in the state of Massachusetts in a decade or two. These are degrees that are really meant to go right to work, right? So a student spends 2 years with us, goes right to work. They can continue their studies if they want. What we were hearing from employers in life sciences and in environmental sciences was that they would often hire people with bachelor's degrees or master's degrees, and they knew a lot. They couldn't always do a lot. I don't mean to overstate that, but they'd have a degree and they learned a lot, conceptually, maybe not as much hands-on. And that's what we specialize in. So we worked with these life sciences companies to create tracks where our students in 2 years could learn how to become sort of bench test quality control technicians, right? Entry-level positions. They would stay on the job longer. They might not have to pay them as much, right? They wouldn't have, the turnover wouldn't be as frequent, and they knew how to do what needed to be done. Practical, hands-on knowledge. So we've got a pretty successful lab science program with different tracks. Students go into internships at the end of that, and frequently they're hired right out of those internships into the employers who have placed them.
When I was with the Boston Business Journal, and I covered the life sciences for a while and biotech and whatever, and as you know, there's some of the largest companies in the world in biotech and medical devices right here in the area, Vertex and Genzyme and Biogen. I mean, all these giants have started here, so I imagine they are starting smaller businesses off there, and there probably would be opportunities.
You bet. And in addition to all those giants that you mentioned, there's some smaller companies. There's Charm Pharmaceuticals, for example, over in Lawrence, which instead of having hundreds or thousands of employees has dozens, and has converted many of their jobs, where they used to have a workforce of, say, 60 people with bachelor's or master's degrees, a dozen or more of those now they hire in at the associate level. So we can help companies like that.
Well, I did notice the head of Google recently said, they speak all the time, but he just said, one of our problems is, the students today coming out of college don't have the skills that we actually need. And so you can probably hear that from any CEO, but I think it probably relates to a lot of the elements, and you're trying to address an area that there could be jobs out here, there could be educational growth in the jobs, and so this is something that you're looking into.
You bet. Yeah, all the time.
One of them, as we talk about the river, and I'm talking with Dr. Lane Glenn, who is the president of Northern Essex Community College. I'm Dyke Hendrickson. This is Life Along the Merrimack River, which is a weekly podcast. And one of the things that I remember from the old days, because I lived in Maine for quite a while, was Ed Muskie in 1972 was able to move other people, and they passed the Clean Water Act in 1972. And it had some real good improvements in 1987. But right now, and this isn't your area, but I must ask the question, one of the programs out there is the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. And this is a situation where states can approach the federal government. Is this something, that Massachusetts could use? Because we always hear, well, this federal administration is not going to support clean rivers. Who knows? But this is, I always like this, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. Is there a promise there?
I don't know the details of that particular fund, Dyke. I do know that at both the state and federal level, we've got allies in this, and I do know, at least I think I do, from what I read and hear from people in D.C. and elsewhere, that although we hear some of those concerns about, the EPA at the national level, there are nonetheless people on the job there every day who know the job that needs to be done, and things are still happening in a positive way, right? Representative Lori Trahan, new 3rd District Congresswoman, is working diligently. In fact, she was originally going to be on our trip with us on the river, and she's helping with legislation that to address some of these environmental concerns. I don't know the details of that fund, but I know that there are lots of tools available and more on the way, I hope.
And, we talked briefly about the Merrimack River Regional Commission, and that is local, state, and federal folks and private citizens as well. It does seem like there's a momentum building, that people are becoming more aware of it, more aware of the values of a clean river, but also something that you said, I'm glad you said it, was it's still a great place for recreation.
Right.
It's still a good, people go fishing there all the time. I went fishing there this summer. I went out on a couple different boats, and we talk about it as having challenges, which it does, but it's still a pretty great place to be.
Yeah, I guess it depends on where you put your marker down and measure, right? If you go back 50 years, 40 years, 30 years, 20 years, I pick your decade, right? It's been getting progressively better. Now, having said that, we've been talking about CSOs and sewage discharge. We haven't really been talking about a problem that the river faces that is historical, that I don't think it faces as much any longer, and that is abandoned cars and giant trash dumps in this river, which happened with regularity for a long time. And there are organizations up and down the river, for example, Groundwork Lawrence, that regularly organizes cleanups of the river, then hauls things out of this river that are not being replaced at the rate that they used to be, right? So there again, the river's getting better, not worse, and I think people need to remember that too.
Well, I am a journalist, and I must say that is one of the disconcerting photos that one sees when they bring out 4 bicycles, or the next day they go in, and they bring out a car and things like that.
Yep.
But there was a period of time, before 72, things were grim. In the 50s and 60s, there was a lot of pollution. My doubles partner in tennis is older than I am, and he says, in the 50s, my mother, didn't let us swim in the river. She didn't want us to go near the river because, and who knows if it was true or not, but it was certainly a concern that it was very polluted. So I go back to 1972 and think things have gotten better since 72, but, I think we're all trying to be alert.
Yeah. And we know more about, what water quality means. I guess the better we get at it, the goalposts move a little bit. When we know we can be even safer, we want to be even safer, right? There's nothing wrong with that, but it helps to keep it in some perspective.
I think one element that would help, and the Watershed Council is working on, is trying to calibrate just what they're looking for in water quality. Like, where are your numbers?
Right.
You're saying it's polluted today. Compared to what? What's the yardstick?
Right.
And so I think once that comes into play, it'll be easier to develop news stories. Again, I'm a journalist, but to say, this is a D level today, D meaning below average, and then other days, we may have 2 weeks of dry weather and it's up in a B+ area.
That's important. At the college, some of the students in that lab science program that I was telling you about last spring undertook a project where they went out and measured the water in the river at different times. And I'm not real close to this project, can't tell you all the details, but I went to their session when they were reporting their results, and they were surprised to find that wherever they sampled and whatever days they sampled on, it was always sort of just below the level that would have said this is critical, right?
Oh, really?
So when they would, for the different chemicals that they were measuring for, and they measured for a few, right? None of them on the days and times that they measured anyway, none of them exceeded what were considered to be major health risks. They all were sort of bumping up there, going, well, you probably wouldn't want to drink this every day, but it was eye-opening for them. So to your point, calibrating that and figuring out, when and how to provide those cautions is probably pretty important.
Well, I did do a story several years ago. I covered the waterfront here in Newburyport as well as City Hall. But I stumbled on this one youngster, college kid, and he had created a job for himself in the summers is cleaning off the hulls of vessels that were here. And I said, geez, how's it going? Do you have enough work? And he said, I have so much work. I got 2 brothers, and I'm putting them to work. Every time a boater goes by, it's like, do you have a card, kid? Because you can come down to, we're at the next marina. So I think for a while there, that was a good job for part-time college kids.
Well, after 4 days on the river, and my kayak has been in that river a lot. After 4 days on the river, I took it out, put it in the yard, and hosed it off, took a sponge to it, and in 5 minutes it was wiped clean. But yeah, there was some stuff to wipe off.
Well, I understand Jim Kelcourse actually turned out to be quite a good kayaker.
Yes.
Now, this is a state rep, if you don't know him. He's quite robust. He played football at Villanova, among other things. And he made the kayak look small, I will say that. But I understand he did a pretty good job.
He was phenomenal, and I think robust is a great way to describe Jim in all kinds of ways. Yes, we found a special kayak for Jim that had the right-sized cockpit and everything else, and Jim was brave about it. Anytime there was a rapids or a falls, he wanted to tackle them. He and a couple others, did manage to dump their boats once or twice, but he did it with a smile, and he kept up and, in fact, led the pack most of the way, and he was just wonderful company.
He's as we say, he's energetic and he's outgoing, and he told me, well, I haven't done much kayaking, but I'm going to give this a try.
Yeah.
And he did really well, and of course, he's one of the people who grew up around here and is working to try to improve this situation.
Yeah.
So we're at about end of our time. I'm talking to Lane Glenn, who is the president of Northern Essex Community College. And maybe you can just finish by talking a little about the college. How many alums do you have, and what areas do you think that kids would enjoy? I mean, let's say they would enjoy studying anything, but what are your strong areas as it relates to your courses this fall?
One of the interesting things about this whole river expedition, I learned something about our alums that I didn't know, and that is, of the 40,000 plus alums that we know we have in the history of the college, 25,000 of them are still alive and living along that river in every single city and town.
Wow.
From Franklin all the way out to Newburyport. So we've got alums in every town along the Merrimack, 25,000 of them. About a third of our degrees and certificates every year are awarded in healthcare fields, right? So nursing, respiratory therapy, radiologic technology, technology. Those are wonderful fields to go into. We're very good at it, wonderful facilities. We have police education and public safety training. Criminal justice is becoming increasingly important. Business, liberal arts transfer for students going into any number of fields. We've got more than 60 degree and certificate options. Come and see us. We'll help you out.
That sounds great. Well, this was Lane Glenn talking, the president of Northern Essex Community College. I'm Dyke Hendrickson. I'm the host of this podcast, which is called Life Along the Merrimack. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and we'll be here next week. Goodbye.